The request came so suddenly that it caught everyone off guard, especially her. She had been standing quietly near the back of the room, trying not to get in anyone's way, when one of the event helpers approached her with a polite smile. The hall was buzzing with people drifting between tables, sipping tea, and chatting softly as they waited for the next activity to begin. It was supposed to be a calm afternoon gathering, nothing fancy, nothing loud, just a simple community event meant to bring people together. She wasn't used to being asked for anything, especially not something that involved standing in front of a crowd. She had planned to stay in the background, maybe help with setting up chairs or handing out programs. But the helper had approached her with a kind expression and said, "Could you play a simple tune on the piano for a few minutes? We just need something to fill the time while the next speaker sets up." Her first instinct was to say no. She felt her chest grow tight, and her thoughts rushed around like scattered papers in a storm. She didn't want all those eyes on her. She didn't want people to expect anything special, and she definitely didn't want to draw attention to herself. But the helper was still standing there, waiting patiently, as if he believed she could lift the mood of the room with just a few notes. She didn't want to disappoint him, and besides, he had said it clearly, they only needed something simple, something easy, something small. So she nodded. She didn't trust her voice to respond without shaking, so she just gave a hesitant smile and walked toward the piano near the side of the hall. The piano itself looked old but well cared for. Its wooden surface was polished, though a few scratches revealed its age. It was the kind of instrument that had probably been in the community center for decades, played by students, teachers, and volunteers over the years. As she walked, she could feel a small group of people glancing her way, not out of curiosity, but because movement in a quiet room tends to draw attention. She tried not to think about it. She tried to focus on her breathing, keeping it slow and steady. When she reached the piano, she stood quietly for a moment, letting her hands rest gently on the edge of the instrument. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she looked around the room, trying to convince herself that it was no big deal. The audience wasn't expecting a performance. They weren't preparing to judge her. They just needed background music, something soft, something simple. That should have made it easier. But somehow, it felt heavier. She lowered herself onto the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. The surface felt cool under her skin, smooth from years of use. She pressed a key lightly, testing the sound. It rang out clean and warm, a gentle tone that spread softly through the hall. She took a breath. She knew basic tunes. She knew the kind of melodies people played when they wanted something pleasant, but not distracting. She could play those easily. She could disappear behind them. But even as she prepared to begin, the familiar nervous flutter rose in her chest. It wasn't the fear of mistakes. Mistakes were natural, and people here wouldn't care if she made one or two. No, the nervousness came from something deeper. It came from the simple fact that she hadn't played in front of people in a long time. She wasn't sure how it would feel. Her mind drifted back to earlier years, to times when music filled her life every day. She remembered evenings spent practicing quietly, moments when she felt connected to something bigger than herself. Back then, she had played not for applause, not for attention, but because it felt like breathing, something natural, something comforting. But those days were behind her now. Life had changed. Responsibilities had shifted, and although she still played sometimes, it was mostly late at night in her small room, where no one could hear. She never talked about her music. She never shared it. She kept it tucked away like an old letter that meant too much to throw away, but felt too personal to show anyone. That hidden part of her felt fragile as she sat on the piano bench, exposed, even. She didn't want people to wonder about her, to ask questions. She didn't want anyone to assume she was anything more than what she appeared to be, someone helping out quietly. Nothing more. So she reminded herself again, just a simple tune. She placed her fingers properly on the keys, preparing to begin. The room around her wasn't silent, but the soft chatter had faded slightly, as if people sensed something was about to happen. She avoided looking directly at anyone. She didn't want to see their expressions, friendly or not. With a steady breath, she began to play the soft opening notes of a familiar, easy melody, one she knew well enough that her hands could move without much thought. The tune was light, smooth, and gentle, like a breeze passing through a quiet room. As she played, a few nearby heads turned toward the piano, not because they expected anything impressive, but simply because music had a way of drawing attention naturally. She felt her shoulders tense at the small shift in focus, but she kept going. Her fingers moved slowly at first. She didn't want to rush. She didn't want to stumble. She wanted to stay inside the safety of the music, letting it shield her from the room. But as the melody continued, something inside her began to soften. The piano keys felt comfortable beneath her hands, familiar in a way that reminded her of all the hours she once spent practicing. Each note seemed to loosen the knot in her chest just a little. She played gently, making sure not to draw too much attention, but the sound still carried through the hall. People began to quiet down more, their conversations lowering to murmurs. A few children sitting near the front glanced up, watching her with curious eyes. She didn't dare look back at them. Instead, she focused on the next note, then the next. The melody flowed smoothly, and little by little, she felt herself settling into the rhythm. Though she played simply, she couldn't help bringing a natural softness to each phrase. It wasn't something she forced. It wasn't something she thought about. It was just how music came out of her, gentle, expressive, full of feeling. As she continued playing, she felt the room growing quieter, not silent, but calmer, as if the atmosphere had shifted slightly. It wasn't because the tune was extraordinary. It was because she played with sincerity, and sincerity had a way of settling over people like warm light. Still, she didn't let herself think too much about it. She stayed focused on the keys, on the familiar motion of her hands. She didn't want to drift into memories. She didn't want to think about moments she'd left behind. She wanted to keep things simple, just as she'd been asked. But even with that intention, she couldn't completely escape the way music made her feel. Her heart softened with every note she played. The room didn't feel so heavy anymore. The nervousness was still there, but it felt quieter, like a distant echo rather than a loud voice. She reached the end of the tune and paused for a brief moment, letting the final note fade naturally. Her fingers hovered gently above the keys, unsure whether to continue or stop. She hadn't expected the moment to feel this complicated. For a second, she thought about ending it there, standing up quietly, stepping away from the piano, and returning to the background where she felt comfortable. It would have been the simplest choice, but something held her there. She wasn't sure whether it was the gentle energy in the room, the way the music still lingered in her chest, or the small spark inside her that had long been sleeping. Whatever it was, she felt a quiet pull urging her not to stop yet. She took another slow breath, letting the air settle in her lungs. Maybe one more short melody. Nothing complicated, nothing bold, just something that felt like her. Her fingers touched the keys again, and she let the music guide her. She didn't overthink it this time. She simply played, allowing the soft tones to rise and fall naturally. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small, warm spark of joy, gentle and careful, like a candle being lit in a dark room. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this small request to fill a few minutes, would become something much bigger, something she never expected. But for now, she just played, unaware that the room was slowly falling under the quiet spell of her music. After that first melody, she felt a little lighter, though a subtle nervousness still lingered in her chest. The gentle music had eased the tension, but it also reminded her of a life she had quietly left behind. She remembered how music had once been a constant in her world, filling her days with purpose and her nights with peace. She had always loved the way it could capture emotions that words could never express, how it could make a room breathe in rhythm with her own feelings. Her memories took her back to childhood evenings spent in a small, sunlit room at home, where her piano waited patiently for her every day. Those times were filled with quiet determination. She would practice scales until her fingers ached, then learn songs slowly, repeating them until each note felt like a part of her own body. It wasn't about performing for anyone. It wasn't about recognition. It was just about connection to herself, to the music, and to the invisible thread that tied her to her happiest moments. Life had changed since then. Responsibilities had grown heavier, and her music had been pushed aside, tucked away in the corners of her life. She had taken jobs, worked hard, and kept herself busy, thinking that the music could wait. But deep down, she knew it had never left her. It was like a quiet river running under the surface of her daily routines, always present, always flowing, even when unseen. Now, sitting at the piano, she realized how much she had missed that connection. Her fingers hovered over the keys as memories of past lessons, past melodies, and past triumphs filled her mind. She thought of the evenings when she had played alone, imagining audiences that never existed, crafting music from her heart without fear of judgment. She remembered how it felt to create something beautiful purely for the joy of it, and how freeing it was to let the music take control. She glanced around the room, trying to remember that this was not a performance for accolades or applause. People were simply there to enjoy a quiet afternoon, to fill a few minutes with soft music. And yet, she felt a quiet pull inside her, urging her to give more, to let her hands speak the words she couldn't put into sentences. It was strange, this feeling of wanting to give something more than what was asked, something that came from deep within. She let her fingers slide across the keys again, this time experimenting a little. She started with the simple melody once more, just to ease herself in, but then allowed her hands to wander slightly, adding small flourishes and gentle variations that weren't written anywhere. It was instinctive. It was natural. Her music began to carry a little of herself in it, the quiet strength, the soft vulnerability, the hidden passion that had always been a part of her. The room seemed to respond to the change. Though no one said anything, conversations had stopped almost entirely, and the soft hum of chatter was replaced by attentive ears and watchful eyes. Even the children who had been whispering to each other now leaned slightly forward, drawn to the music in a way that felt almost magnetic. She hadn't intended to capture anyone's attention, but the music seemed to have a life of its own. She began to notice small details about the people in the room. A man at the back had tilted his head slightly, listening intently. An elderly woman clasped her hands together, her eyes closing as if the melody brought her back to a distant memory. Even those who had been chatting quietly now sat more upright, their focus quietly shifting toward her and the piano. She had never sought attention, yet the moment revealed how music could speak to others without needing explanation. She realized that her playing had the power to touch people in ways words could not. That thought both frightened and exhilarated her. She felt exposed, but also alive in a way she hadn't felt for years. She allowed herself to take a deep breath and focus on the keys beneath her fingers. She didn't think about what anyone else might expect. She didn't think about mistakes or performance. She simply listened to the notes and let her hands respond. It felt like she was speaking without words, telling a story through the rise and fall of the melody, through soft pauses and gentle crescendos. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her story, a fragment of her past, and a glimpse of the hope she had quietly held onto as she played. She noticed that the piano seemed to encourage her, the keys responding to her touch as if they remembered her from the past. It was comforting and familiar, and it reminded her that some things never truly leave us. The music she had loved as a child was still within her, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. The simple tune she had been asked to play slowly began to evolve. She added soft harmonies with her left hand, allowing the melody to breathe and flow in a way that felt more expressive. She experimented with timing, elongating certain notes and shortening others, creating subtle dynamics that gave the music depth and texture. It was still simple, still approachable, but it carried a richness that hadn't been there at the very start. She caught herself smiling faintly as she played. It was a smile of recognition, of remembering who she was and what she could do. The music wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being true to herself, about letting the rhythm of her heart guide her fingers. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of joy that had nothing to do with obligations, schedules, or expectations. The audience, still quiet, seemed to sense this authenticity. Their attention was natural, unforced. They were not there to judge. They were there to witness. They didn't know it yet, but this simple tune was becoming something more, something that carried warmth, sincerity, and a quiet brilliance. They felt it in the pauses, in the gentle rise of the melody, in the subtle variations that made it feel alive. She continued to play, letting the music guide her intuitively. Her fingers moved with confidence, rediscovering the ease that had once been second nature. She felt a rhythm within herself that matched the music, a pulse that connected her to the notes and to the audience in a way she hadn't anticipated. The hall no longer felt intimidating. It felt welcoming, as if the room itself had softened to the touch of the melody. Her mind wandered briefly to the years she had hidden her talent. She wondered if she had been afraid of being seen, or if she had simply forgotten the joy that came from sharing her gift. Either way, she realized that hiding it had not dimmed it. The music had waited patiently for the right moment, for a gentle opportunity to remind her of what she was capable of. She took a breath and continued to explore the piano. She didn't rush. She didn't force herself. Each note was intentional yet effortless, reflecting both discipline and emotion. The music became a quiet conversation between her heart and the room, a dialogue that needed no words. She felt herself becoming fully present, fully engaged. and fully alive in that small corner of the community hall. Time seemed to stretch. Though she didn't notice how long she had been playing, the music had a natural flow, and she allowed herself to follow it wherever it led. Occasionally, she glanced at the faces in the audience, seeing gentle smiles, relaxed postures, and quiet awe. She didn't need to see the full effect, but it was clear that something subtle, something important, was happening. By the time she reached the end of her second melody, she felt a gentle warmth in her chest. She realized that the music had not only brought a small spark of joy to the audience, but had also awakened something inside her. The connection she had once felt as a child had returned, stronger and more vibrant than before. When the last note faded, she let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, savoring the quiet aftermath. The room remained calm, but the air felt charged in a way she couldn't explain. It was as if the music had left an invisible thread connecting her to everyone present, a subtle bond woven from sound, emotion, and presence. She knew then that she had crossed an invisible line from playing music in private to sharing it in a way that truly mattered. The thought both excited and humbled her. She had stepped out of the shadows, not with fanfare or intent, but with gentle courage, trusting the music and trusting herself. In that quiet moment, she understood something important. Music was not just a personal solace. It could reach others, touch hearts, and create a shared experience that words alone could never achieve. And though she had started simply, the unfolding melody had revealed the hidden depth of her talent, the quiet brilliance she had always carried within herself. She felt a quiet thrill as her fingers danced across the keys. What had started as a simple melody now carried a life of its own. The music flowed naturally, guided by instinct and memory, yet filled with emotion that she hadn't realized was still so strong inside her. It was like the piano remembered her touch, responding to the subtle movements of her hands with a warmth and depth that made each note resonate beyond the room. The people in the hall were noticing. They didn't move, they didn't whisper. Their attention had shifted entirely to her, drawn to the piano by the unexpected beauty of the sounds that filled the air. It wasn't a loud or showy performance. It was gentle, careful, yet somehow commanding. Every note she played seemed to reach directly into the hearts of those listening, touching something unspoken, unseen, but deeply felt. Her mind was quiet, yet full at the same time. She wasn't thinking about the crowd, or the event, or what anyone might say afterward. She was thinking about the music itself, about the story it wanted to tell, about the emotions it wanted to share. The notes rose and fell with a rhythm that seemed to belong to her own heartbeat, steady and certain. It was an instinctual language she had always understood, but never needed to explain. As she played, she felt a freedom she hadn't experienced in years. Life had been so filled with rules, with responsibilities, with the constant push to conform and manage every detail, that the joy of simply creating had been buried under the weight of necessity. But here, at this piano, in front of a room of strangers, she found herself letting go, letting the music lead her rather than trying to control it, letting her emotions guide her fingers rather than fear or expectation. A soft smile crossed her face without her realizing it. She had not expected to feel this alive, this connected, this powerful in a quiet, subtle way. It was not the kind of power that demanded attention or respect. It was the kind that comes from knowing that what you are doing matters, even if it is not recognized outwardly. It was the kind that comes from authenticity, from being completely yourself. She began to vary the simple melody she had been asked to play, exploring small embellishments and gentle changes in pace. The music stretched and curled in unexpected ways, but it still felt natural. Each note was chosen with care, yet flowed effortlessly, as if the piano and she were having a conversation, a quiet dialogue between her emotions and the instrument. She could feel the room listening, absorbing every nuance, every soft trill and subtle pause. Some people in the audience were leaning forward now, their eyes wide, their expressions open. The children, who had been fidgeting earlier, sat still, captivated by the quiet magic filling the space. She couldn't see the subtle movements of some in the back, the way heads tilted slightly, the way small smiles appeared on faces that had initially been polite, but indifferent. She didn't need to see it to feel it. The energy in the room had shifted, and she could sense it in the soft hush that had replaced casual chatter. Her heart beat steadily, but it carried a quiet excitement. She was aware of herself in a new way, of what she could do when she let go of doubt and fear. She remembered all the times she had played alone, when she had allowed herself to be completely vulnerable to the music, letting it carry her through difficult days and lonely nights. Now she realized that vulnerability could also be a gift to others, that sharing even a small piece of herself could touch lives in ways she hadn't imagined. She continued playing, allowing the music to build gradually, not in volume, not in drama, but in depth. She let the harmonies weave subtly, letting her left hand support the melody without overwhelming it. Each note was measured, intentional, yet flowing naturally from the emotion she felt. She could feel the story taking shape in the room, unspoken but deeply understood, like a whisper traveling through the hearts of those listening. Time seemed to lose meaning. Minutes slipped by unnoticed as she explored the possibilities of the melody. She was fully present, completely absorbed. Her usual self-consciousness had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence, a certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do at that moment. She felt the subtle reactions of the audience as she played, a soft gasp here, a gentle intake of breath there. People shifted slightly in their seats, as if leaning closer to hear every subtle change. She didn't play for these reactions, but they added a quiet warmth to the room, a sense that what she was sharing mattered. It encouraged her, reminded her that music is a form of communication, a bridge between souls. Occasionally, she let her fingers wander beyond the expected notes, improvising small variations that were entirely instinctive. She had not planned these changes, yet they felt right, natural, and perfectly timed. The piano responded beautifully, each key resonating with clarity, each chord carrying emotion without effort. She was no longer simply playing a tune. She was telling a story, one that no words could capture, one that only music could convey. As she played, her mind wandered to the past, the late nights of practice, the quiet solitude of learning and refining her skills, the private triumphs when a difficult passage finally felt perfect. Those memories gave her courage. They reminded her that her talent had been nurtured, that her hands remembered the discipline and care of years of practice. Even if her mind had forgotten the stage, it was all coming together now, in this small hall, in front of these strangers who were unknowingly witnesses to a personal revelation. The melody began to swell gently, not in loudness, but in emotion. She allowed her feelings to guide her hands, letting each note express a fragment of her story, a reflection of her life's quiet joys and struggles. The music was no longer just a simple tune. It had become something more intimate, more personal, yet universally understandable. She could feel the room responding, subtly but unmistakably, to the energy she poured into the keys. She paused for a moment, letting a chord linger. The room was silent, but not empty. It was filled with anticipation, with quiet attention, with a shared sense of presence. She felt a deep satisfaction in that moment, a recognition that the music was touching something essential within her and the audience alike. It was a reminder that beauty does not always need grandeur. It can exist quietly, in subtlety, in the gentle unfolding of an honest expression. As the piece progressed, she began to experiment with dynamics. Soft passages became slightly more pronounced. Gentle crescendos rose and fell naturally, guided entirely by instinct. She noticed the slight reactions in the room, people leaning forward, small smiles appearing, a few eyes glistening with emotion. She did not play to elicit these responses, yet they confirmed what she already felt. The music was connecting, resonating, touching. Her confidence grew with each passing measure. She realized that the fear that had gripped her at the beginning was no longer necessary. She could let the music take control, could allow herself to be fully immersed without worry. The piano was an extension of herself, and together they were creating something beyond expectation, something that surpassed the simple request she had been given. She played for herself, for the audience, and for the invisible moments of her past that had shaped her love for music. The notes became a reflection of her journey, the challenges she had faced, the hours of silent practice, the quiet determination that had never left her. And in sharing that with others, she felt a profound sense of connection, a recognition that music is not just personal, but shared, a bridge that can unite people in ways words cannot. When she finally began to bring the melody toward its conclusion, she did so gently, allowing the music to fade naturally rather than end abruptly. She let the final notes linger, holding them as if to let the room absorb everything that had passed between her and the piano, between her and the audience. She felt a calm satisfaction, a quiet pride that came not from seeking recognition, but from having expressed herself fully and honestly. The room was silent for a brief moment. After the last note, no one spoke, no one moved. It was a pause filled with reflection, with appreciation, with the subtle realization that something extraordinary had happened, quietly, gently, almost imperceptibly. And though she did not yet know it, she had begun a transformation, one that would change the way people saw her, and the way she saw herself, forever. She noticed the subtle shift in the room as she continued to play. The simple gathering had transformed into a space charged with quiet admiration. Though no one had made a sound to acknowledge it, every person seemed to hold their breath, fully absorbed in the music, as if the world outside had ceased to exist for a moment. She could sense it in the gentle stillness, in the way heads had turned slightly toward her, in the soft leaning forward of those who wanted to catch every nuance of her playing. Her hands moved with more confidence now. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story. The keys under her fingers became extensions of her thoughts, her emotions, and the memories she had carried for years. She felt the music rising from her heart, flowing through her fingers, and spreading gently throughout the room. Each chord resonated with meaning, carrying subtle layers that she hadn't planned, but instinctively knew belonged together. The audience, though quiet, began to react in ways that were hard to miss. A few leaned closer, eyes widening in surprise and wonder. Some of the older guests closed their eyes, letting the melody remind them of something long forgotten, something personal. Children who had been restless moments before now sat quietly, mesmerized by the gentle complexity of the music. She did not need to look at them to feel the effect. She could sense it in the air, in the energy that had shifted completely from casual chatter to complete engagement. She realized then that what she was creating was far beyond a simple tune. The melody had grown richer, deeper, more expressive than she had intended. Each note carried a touch of emotion, a hint of story, a whisper of memories she hadn't shared with anyone. Her hands moved almost on their own, guided by years of experience and a deep, natural understanding of music. The piano seemed to respond to her with its own kind of language, resonating perfectly with every gesture, every subtle press of a key. She felt a quiet thrill in her chest, a mixture of exhilaration and calm. It was not the nervous excitement of performing before others, nor the pressure of needing to impress. It was a pure, quiet joy, the joy of giving something real and beautiful without expectation, the joy of sharing something that had always been a part of her, but hidden from the world. And she could feel it touching others, not with grandeur, not with flashiness, but with gentle sincerity. Her fingers began to explore gentle variations on the melody, weaving soft harmonies and delicate flourishes into the music. She added subtle pauses, letting the notes linger in the air, giving the audience time to absorb each moment. The simple tune had become a conversation, a dialogue between her and the piano, and between her and the listeners. It was intimate, yet expansive, private, yet shared. She had never experienced anything like it in a live setting, and it filled her with a sense of quiet pride and wonder. She noticed one person at the back of the room, leaning slightly forward, eyes shining with emotion. Another guest, an older woman with a gentle smile, had closed her eyes completely, as if transported to a memory from long ago. Even the children seemed captivated, their small faces focused and thoughtful. She did not play for applause or recognition, yet the subtle responses of the audience gave her an unspoken affirmation. Her music was connecting, reaching, communicating in ways words never could. Time became almost irrelevant. She did not notice how long she had been playing. Minutes seemed to stretch, yet pass quickly all at once. She was fully present in every note, every chord, every pause. The music was alive, moving organically, and she let herself follow it wherever it wanted to go. She felt free, yet focused, relaxed, yet engaged in a way that demanded her full attention and commitment. As she continued, the music grew richer, layered with the subtleties of emotion she had carefully tucked into her playing. It was no longer a simple tune, it was a full expression of herself. The highs and lows of her life, the quiet moments of struggle, the bursts of happiness, the hidden joys, and the private sorrows all seemed to find their way into her fingers. She played without thinking too much about technique or perfection. She let the feeling guide her, and it created something far more powerful than she could have planned. Her heart beat steadily, but she felt a warm energy spreading through her chest, a mix of exhilaration and deep contentment. The music carried her beyond herself, beyond the hall, beyond the moment. She could feel its effect on the people around her, the quiet way it touched each listener individually while uniting them as a group. There was a shared experience here, subtle yet profound, and she was at the center, guiding it, yet also part of it. She began to add soft flourishes, gentle trills, and delicate arpeggios. Each addition felt natural, as though the music itself was suggesting the path. She didn't think about whether it was right or wrong, simple or complex. She just followed the flow, letting the piano guide her hands, letting the melody carry her forward. The simple request to play a tune had transformed into something more significant, something authentic and deeply moving. The room's energy continued to shift. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no standing ovations, no cheering, no clapping in the middle of her performance. It was something quieter but more profound, a collective holding of breath, a gentle leaning into the sound, a silent acknowledgement that something rare and beautiful was happening. She could feel it in every corner of the room, in every subtle movement, in every small gesture that indicated attention and absorption. She allowed herself to be fully immersed. Each note, each chord, each pause became part of her, and part of the story she was telling. She was aware of the time, but only loosely. She was not counting minutes or measures. She was experiencing the music in real time, responding instinctively, allowing the melody to develop and transform naturally. It was a living thing, and she was merely a conduit, letting it flow freely and honestly. As she approached the conclusion of her piece, she slowed slightly, letting the music breathe. She allowed each note to resonate fully, letting the audience absorb its subtle beauty. She didn't rush to finish. She wanted each moment to linger, to create a gentle, lasting impression. She could feel the quiet anticipation in the room, the sense that something extraordinary had unfolded right before their eyes. And indeed, it had, quietly, subtly, yet powerfully. When the final notes faded, she lifted her hands from the keys and sat quietly for a moment. The room remained still, the audience not clapping immediately, as if savoring the final vibrations of the piano, letting the music settle in their hearts. She felt a deep, warm satisfaction, a quiet pride in having shared a piece of herself so completely, so genuinely. It was a victory of a different kind, not over others, not for recognition, but over her own doubts and fears, over the hesitation that had held her back for so long. Slowly, one by one, small signs of appreciation began to emerge. A gentle smile here, a soft nod there, a quiet whisper of admiration, barely audible. She did not seek it, but it felt like a confirmation that what she had given was real and meaningful. She realized, in that moment, that music has a unique power. It does not need applause to validate it, yet it carries a resonance that can touch hearts and leave an invisible mark. Her breathing returned to normal, calm yet fulfilled. She felt a warmth spreading through her, a subtle excitement tempered by quiet reflection. She had done something extraordinary, not because it was demanded or expected, but because she allowed herself to be fully present, fully engaged, fully honest. The piano had become a partner, an extension of herself, a channel for emotions too complex for words alone. And in doing so, she had created a moment that would linger in the minds of those who had listened, even long after the room had emptied. For a brief instant, she closed her eyes, letting the silence envelop her. The echo of the last chord lingered softly in the air. She could feel it, almost like a pulse, a gentle reminder that the music, and the connection it had created, was still alive. It had transcended the simple expectations of the afternoon, had reached something deeper, and had, in turn, awakened something within her as well. She opened her eyes and took a slow, deliberate breath. The audience was still watching, still quietly present, still absorbing the impact of what had just occurred. She felt a sense of quiet triumph, not in ego or recognition, but in the realization that she had allowed herself to shine, even in the smallest of ways. The simple tune had become a story, a reflection of her life, a bridge to the hearts of those who had witnessed it, and she had done it entirely on her own terms. As the final notes of her music faded into the quiet of the room, she let her hands rest gently on the keys, savoring the last vibrations that lingered in the air. The audience sat in stunned silence, a mixture of awe, reflection, and unspoken appreciation hanging in the atmosphere. She felt a soft rush of emotion within herself, a blend of relief, joy, and a subtle recognition that something important had just happened, not just for them, but for her. She had started the afternoon expecting only to fill a few minutes with a simple tune. That was all anyone had asked. But what had unfolded was something much more profound. In her own quiet, unassuming way, she had shared a part of herself that had been hidden for years, a gift nurtured in solitude and moments of private triumph. And now, without intention or fanfare, it had reached people in ways words never could. Slowly, small movements of acknowledgement began to ripple through the room. A few people exhaled quietly, almost as if releasing held-back emotions. Some leaned forward, eyes glistening. Others offered gentle smiles, silent nods, or whispered conversations to the person next to them, amazed at the unexpected brilliance they had just witnessed. The effect wasn't dramatic, but it was deeply felt. The room had been transformed, subtly and beautifully, by something simple yet authentic. She felt a quiet pride swelling within her chest. Not the kind of pride tied to applause or recognition, but the kind that comes from authenticity, from allowing oneself to be truly seen, if only for a moment. She had taken a small request, an ordinary task, and through honesty, courage, and patience, had created a meaningful experience. She realized that the gift of music wasn't about being celebrated, it was about connecting, about touching lives, about expressing something beyond language. One of the older guests approached her slowly, a soft smile on their face. "That was extraordinary," they whispered, voice trembling slightly with emotion. She nodded shyly, her own voice catching when she tried to respond. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure if she could convey the depth of what she felt. Words seemed so small compared to the music she had just shared. A younger woman, perhaps in her 20s, lingered a little farther back, her eyes bright and attentive. "I've never heard anything like that," she said softly, almost in awe. "You made it feel alive, like it was telling a story." Again, she felt a faint smile rise to her lips, the warmth of understanding passing quietly between them. No grand gestures, no excessive praise, just honest acknowledgement that what she had shared mattered. The room gradually began to return to its normal state. Soft conversations resumed, though now tinged with a reflective energy. People seemed lighter somehow, as though the music had left a gentle imprint on their mood. She watched them quietly, noticing the subtle changes, the way a man at the back still leaned slightly forward, still attentive, or the way a child sat a little straighter, as if holding on to the lingering beauty of the melody. These were the moments that mattered. These were the signs that what she had given, however quietly, had reached someone. She rose from the piano bench slowly, taking a final glance at the instrument that had been her partner throughout this journey. The old wooden surface reflected the soft light from the hall, polished and worn in equal measure. It had witnessed her hesitations, her rediscovery, and her courage. She touched it gently, almost in gratitude, acknowledging the silent companionship that had carried her through each note and each phrase. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt a new sense of ease, a subtle confidence that had not been there before. She realized that she had crossed a personal threshold. Playing had once been a private solace, something hidden and personal. Now it had become a bridge to others, a shared experience that could quietly touch hearts. And she had done it without pretense, without show, simply by allowing herself to be honest and present. People approached her one by one, quietly expressing admiration, curiosity, and appreciation. She listened to their words, offered polite smiles, and felt a gentle warmth spreading in her chest. The attention was unexpected, but it was not overwhelming. It felt real, meaningful, and human, an acknowledgement of the honesty she had poured into the music. She didn't need grandeur or applause. She only needed the quiet recognition that her gift had made a difference, even if just for a moment. Some asked questions, curious about her training, her experiences, her journey with music. She answered softly, briefly, without seeking to impress. She didn't speak of accolades or competitions. She spoke of practice, patience, and the quiet love for music that had carried her through life's challenges. And with each exchange, she felt the bond between herself and the listeners deepen, subtle but significant, grounded in mutual understanding and shared human experience. As the room slowly emptied, she took a quiet moment to reflect. She thought about how life had brought her to this point through years of hidden practice, moments of doubt, times of solitude, and private dedication. None of it had been wasted. Every hour spent at the piano, every careful practice, every quiet night alone had prepared her for this unexpected opportunity. And now, standing in the soft aftermath, she realized that all those years of unseen effort had finally found their purpose. She walked slowly toward the exit, feeling the lingering energy of the room wrap around her gently. The air was filled with warmth, with gratitude, with quiet awe. She understood that this was the impact of authenticity, of sincerity, of sharing a piece of one's soul without fear. The music had carried not only her emotions, but also the attention and hearts of those present. It had created a small but lasting resonance, one that would linger long after the final notes had faded. Her mind wandered briefly to the future, to possibilities she had never considered before. She realized that this moment was not just an isolated event, but a doorway, a reminder that her talent, once hidden and unacknowledged, had value beyond herself. It could inspire, soothe, and uplift others. She felt a quiet determination to nurture that gift, to allow it to grow. and to share it when the opportunity arose. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for the simple, profound act of connection. As she stepped outside, the light of the late afternoon filtered softly through the windows. She paused for a moment, breathing in the calm air, feeling the lingering echoes of the music in her mind. She felt grounded, yet elevated, aware of the quiet power of her own abilities, the hidden brilliance that had always existed within her. It was a revelation of self-worth, of possibility, and of the gentle strength that comes from embracing one's true passions. The experience left her with a sense of quiet fulfillment that she had rarely felt before. She had approached the piano expecting only to fulfill a simple request. Instead, she had rediscovered herself, shared her inner world, and touched the hearts of strangers in ways that would remain with them long after the afternoon ended. It was a reminder that life's small opportunities, when met with courage and authenticity, could lead to moments of profound significance. Walking away, she felt a gentle smile form, a quiet acknowledgement of what had just occurred. She understood that this was only the beginning, that the piano, the music, and her own hidden brilliance had the potential to continue creating these moments. And though she might return to her everyday life, the memory of this afternoon, the impact of her music, and the sense of connection it had fostered would stay with her forever. She had played a simple tune, but in doing so, she had unveiled a brilliance that was quietly, yet unmistakably, her own.